Hello, everyone. You're watching Empowering Women Summit 2020. My name is Kardem Büyüktanır Aktar, and I'm a vice chair of IEEE Turkey Women in Engineering. Today's our guest is Ken Stauffer, who is serial entrepreneur and 2020 chair of IEEE Entrepreneurship. Welcome to our session.
Thank you.
Let me first read your biography, then give the word to you. Ken Stauffer has spent 30 plus years in telecommunications industry. He began his career at AT&T Bell Laboratories in Homedale, New Jersey. After receiving his AAS from Wohen College and BSEE from PET and MSEE from Polytechnic University in New York City. At Bell's Lab, Ken worked in data services performance, where he and the team designed a system called Packet SPN to measure performance in packet networks and to establish a data application labs. Later, Ken moved into the International Operations Group to design and deploy AT&T's Global Network Management Center in New York City, and to deploy the centers in Europe alongside a pan-European frame relay network. For AT&T's Global Strategy and Business Development Group, Ken develop business and technical models for World Partner S2, participated in creation of Concert, and the AT&T BT joint venture, and manage AT&T's business relationship with Japan Telecom Japan. In Japan. Ken left AT&T in 2000 to become an entrepreneur as a part of a management team founding Epic Communications, $460 million startup in Florida. He designed Epic's advanced services strategy, created both Product Innovation Group and Epic Labs, implemented a suite of enlightened IP in Ethernet products, and served the Epic Senior Vice President of Operations and Chief Technology Officer. He also led a team to create the vision for the NAP in 2011 of Americas in Miami, which was later sold by Terramark in Verizon in 2011 for $1.4 billion. In January 2003, Ken formed Technology Assurance Labs to provide consulting, design, and testing services to venture capital groups, network equipment manufacturers, and service providers. He also founded Cypress Equipment, a product sales company. Starting in 2020, Technology Assurance Lab develops RFID products for the rail industry and LOT products for the propane and natural gas industry. Ken served as CEO of both companies for 15 years before stepping down to become chair of the board of directors. Ken was born and raised in Tanzania, East Africa. He is a life senior member of IEEE, and he co-founded the IEEE Entrepreneurship Initiative in 2015. He currently serves at the 2020 chair of the IEEE Entrepreneurship Steering Committee and the chair of the One College Board of Tourists in New York City. A long biography. Today we are going to talk about leadership is not about your resume, life lessons learned, right? I'm giving the words to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's interesting that my topic is leadership is not about your resume, life lessons learned. So you can forget all about the resume you just heard, because I'm going to talk to you a little bit differently today about what leadership is and give you some lessons I learned throughout my whole life. And you can go off and read many articles, from presidents and, CEOs and, generals, 4-star military generals about leadership. And that's usually about a hierarchical position. You're in this position and you're a leader because you got elected or you were named there or something, even within IEEE, right? I'm going to talk more about situational leadership, which is what we do every day in families, in communities, on the playground, in schools, at work. And I'm going to talk about lessons I learned throughout my life. And they're going to be more like little lessons, little vignettes that taught me skills that I hopefully, you can take some of them and they're very useful for you. Maybe we'll see. Um, my life was quite different. I was born and raised in Tanzania, East Africa. I grew up in a mud brick house. We had no running water. We cooked on a wood stove. So that was where I lived, and I was bilingual from birth. I spoke Swahili and English. And then I came to the United States at 13 years of age, which is a tough year to make a change like that, right? When you're 13, your teenage years. Um, so that, and then I did a lot of other weird things. I went to college, first of all, in philosophy. And then I went to and worked in the professional theater as a stage manager and was a stage manager for many years. And that's how I got started. Then I went back to electrical engineering and got my degrees and worked at Bell Labs. And in there, I was a serious rock climber, putting up first ascents. So I'll tell you a little bit about learning leadership from that. I'll tell you from the theater what I learned. I'll tell you also as a soccer coach what I learned. I'll tell you what I learned at Bell Labs, and I'll tell you what I learned as an entrepreneur. And all those things have different leadership qualities to them and different interesting things you might want to know about. All right. So that's what I'm going to tell you about. So let's talk a little bit about, first of all, I was constantly adapting. I had to adapt. I was very different from most people. And so I would have to fit into a culture or adapt as I went. So a lot of leadership is learning to adapt, right, to your situation and picking up on the situational piece of it all. Um, the theater was one of the interesting ones that I did early on. I was very young. I was in my 20s. I was a stage manager. And a stage manager, just so you know what they do, they help when the director of the show is selected. The director has the artistic talent, and they have all kinds of people helping them. They have stage managers, they have scenic designers, they have costume designers. But the director has the stage manager working through casting with them side by side, through the rehearsals side by side, all the way through to opening night. And on opening night, the director leaves the show. The show is set, and the stage manager runs it from then on, artistically and technically. So you have a lot of authority, and you're working with a lot of big name divas and a lot of big egos and a lot of people who are, so that's what your job is, and it's very interesting. The nice thing about it was it provided a nice little lab for me early on to try to figure out what my management style or leadership style should be. Because this is not like an organization where if you mess up, they're going to remember it for the rest of your life. Every cast is new, and then it goes away, and then there's a new cast, and it goes away. And so you're working with different people and new people, so you can try different styles. And sometimes, and I was in my 20s, I was still trying to figure out what you should do as a leader. So sometimes I was very, very empathetic, and other times I was a strict authoritarian, and I could try different styles. So it was kind of almost like a little lab for me to try leadership styles in, right? And I learned something out of that. I learned that basically the best style, the style that you want, is the authentic you, whatever that means. Whatever who you are, and you're authentic to that, is really how people train up to you. They'll train up to your style as long as you're really authentic. People can smell authenticity. We used to say in the theater, you can't act innocence. Well, you can't act authenticity either. You got, it's there or it's not there. You can't have hidden agendas. You have to be honest. You have to be who you are and be comfortable with yourself. And then people will follow and they will listen to you because they sense that you really are looking out for the interests of the group. This is all about motivating people and getting everybody towards a common goal, right? And they're looking to you to be the one who's helping them get there to that goal. And they're looking to you to be the one who's going to motivate them. So that's one of the learnings I had from stage management. The other one I learned, which I think is interesting, is to be able to pair up wisdom with youth. Oftentimes during very, very complicated scene changes in the dark, when sets are moving and things are flying in and out, you have to be very, very, you have to coordinate a lot of stuff, right? So I would always team up somebody who was wise and old and been around for a while with somebody who was very young and youthful and had a lot of energy. And the reason is, if you think about this as flying, you want the senior captain of the airline to be able to see the dead end developing. He sees the weather, he sees the situation, he doesn't go down the dead end because he's wise. But the young jet fighter who has great reaction time and speed might go down there not knowing about it, but he has the reaction speed to get out of it when it starts to deteriorate, right? So if you pair wisdom and youth, oftentimes in situations, you get the best of both worlds. You get somebody who has been around and knows, hey, we shouldn't do that, or somebody else, if there's something you need the speed, you got it, right? So those are the two things I sort of learned from stage management, which I think were really good early on for me in my 20s. And then what did I learn from rock climbing? So I don't know if you know how rock climbing goes, but basically what happens is you go out to a rock face and you have a piece of rope and you tie, the leader ties into it, and so does the belayer at the bottom, and you start up this rock face. And as you go up this rock face, you put pieces of protection into the rock. But if you're leading, you're going to fall twice the distance of your last piece, because that's just the way it works. The person below is going to catch you, hopefully, but that slack that you have above your last piece is going to double as you fall. So the whole thing about leading is trying to figure out when to stop and put in a piece of protection that will save your life versus burning out your hands and arms stopping to do that, right? Is it's better to keep moving and run it out or not? So leading on a rock is very tiring mentally. It's tiring physically. But what really is good is if you have somebody who's an equal partner to you, you get up to wherever your rope length is and you set up a belay and you bring up your partner. And then if the partner is equal and good as you, they can lead the next pitch while you take a pitch to relax and keep your mind at ease. So finding equal partners in leadership is really good. In all my companies that I ever started, I always got somebody else in to be a partner with a different skill set, but somebody I trusted and was really good, because I found it was much better to have, shared leadership than just be the single person myself. The other lesson that comes to light out of rock climbing is about fear. I mean, there's no doubt about it. If you're, up a rock face, and there's several hundred feet or 1,000 feet of dead air below you, it's it's challenging, right? If I said to you, climb on this table here, and it was sitting in the room, I say, climb up on this table, you would think nothing and you would do it easily, right? If I put 100 feet of dead air or 1,000 feet of dead air below the table, it'll become impossible for you to climb on the table. Nothing changed physically. Just mentally, you're going to tell yourself, I'm going to die. So you got to think about that too. What fear is a powerful motivator. It really stops people from doing things. It's one of the most powerful emotion we have comes back from our caveman days when there was flight or fear, right? So you need to think about that oftentimes in leadership. Is this reasonable? It's all within my capabilities. Why am I being fearful about it? Worried about failing or what here? The way in a rock climb you deal with that is you look at this little square that's right around your eyes and hands and your feet, and that's where you're working. That's where you're having to make your moves. You don't sit there staring straight up, and you don't sit there staring straight down, thinking about all the bad things that can happen to you. You focus on that area right within your control where you need to be controlling it, right? So that's a great lesson from rock climbing. Let me look at some of my other notes here. Okay, so what did I learn from soccer coaching? So in the US, we have the FIFA did this big study because they found that the US had all these people, one of the largest catchment pools in the world, meaning young people coming in at very young ages to play, and it's a big country and a big population. One of the largest catchment pools, but one of the worst rates of moving people up into the upper tiers. I mean, there weren't many Americans in MLS, much less, the Premier League, right? Because they were, for some reason, this huge catchment pool, but we couldn't get really good top-notch athletes out of it. So they did a huge study, big study for, I don't know how many, a lot of, interviews and questionnaires and everything. And what they found the reason was that it was becoming too competitive too early. It wasn't fun. So kids would start off in the beginning when I don't know how old they are, they're having a lot of fun. And at some point, the coaches and the parents were getting very, very competitive and pushing the kids so hard, a lot of times because they wanted them to get scholarships to go to college or whatever reason. And I know even with my own son, he found, at times when he was in high school playing that he thought it was too competitive. He enjoyed the club sports better than the school sports. So they kept emphasizing to us to keep it fun and entertaining and let people have fun. And I'm going to come back to that later, because I think that's one of the key elements of leading, is that when you lead people, you got to make it enjoyable. It can't be too competitive. I found that in IEEE, having humor and fun is a great thing. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that was a great learning from the soccer coaching days about fun. Let's talk about Bell Labs. What did I learn there? Bell Labs in those days, this is in the 80s and 90s, was a definition of an AT&T leader was somebody who was white, 6 foot, maybe 1 or 2 inches tall, had a great resume, whatever. Obviously, I wasn't one of those. But I had a really good mentor, and her name was Kathy Kleiber. She was a great mentor. And she used to always say to me, Ken, leadership comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors. Leadership comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors. And she was absolutely right. And she was very enjoyable. And she really was a great motivator. So that is one of the things I want to tell everybody, that leadership, you think you know what a leadership looks like. You don't. They come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. You can lead in any situation. You can be a leader, with different types of skill sets. As long as you're authentic to your style and you're honest and there isn't hidden agendas, you can do it, right? What happened was, in the early days of Bell Labs, it was a very white male institution, and I think the Justice Department brought some sort of action against them. So they were mandated to do affirmative action training every year, meaning they had training. They had, it was part of the program. And some of the mistakes that were happened in those early days, we learned later on that they were mistakes, but they would try to talk about managing women as a group, or talking about managing Hispanics as a group, right? You can't do that. You can't manage the groups. You have to manage the individuals, right? People are individuals. They have unique characteristics that motivate them. They have unique things that make them who they are. And so you need to learn the people around you. You need to learn about them, and then manage to their strengths and weaknesses, and motivate them to their strengths and weaknesses. And I'll give you a good example of that. If somebody's an introvert or an extrovert, you motivate them very differently, right? The extrovert, you bring them up on stage, you give them a big award in front of everybody else, you make a lot of hoopla, and they are as happy as it goes, right? That's the theatrical crowd, not maybe, I don't know. The introverts, that's a huge demotivator. I mean, they don't want to. The better to give them a gift card of $100 and say, you know what, take your wife out to dinner. You did a phenomenal job, whatever it is. That motivates an introvert, right? So you really do need to know around you, who working for you, who you're working for, do a sort of a 360 and understand that, because that's the way you manage and motivate people. So it is by individual, not by a group or by class or something like that, right? That is a lot of what I learned at Bell Labs. Diversity is hugely important. We make a big deal out of it in IEEE Entrepreneurship. And in fact, if you look at our steering committee this year and next year, you're going to see it's a very, very diverse committee. The reason it's so important is because it eliminates blind spots. It eliminates biases that you have, right? When you have a diverse group of people working on something, you'll get a lot of different angles of looking at it, a lot of different perceptions of it, and that's all healthy. That's good. That makes it better. If you're sitting there all looking at it the same way, then there's a blind spot and you're going to miss it, right? So diversity is a very important thing. It sends a message, but it also gives you the best of all, gives you great ideas, great plans, makes you move things forward better, all that. So we're very big on that. What did I learn from being an entrepreneur and CEO? So entrepreneurship is very, very different than there usually, in the early days, there is no hierarchy, really. You're all in this one room together trying to make this thing work, right? You and, there's a small group of people. So there isn't, and the roles and the responsibilities aren't really set yet. So it's not like hierarchical management, like at AT&T or in, a big company where it's defined by, I'm a manager or I'm a vice president or something like that. It's oftentimes much more a group of people trying to move the ball forward and being motivated. So there, I think the skills that you really have to use are listening, learning, adapting, probably working harder than everybody else and setting a good example, because, you're really are still setting up the culture and the future of the company. That's what you're really doing. I mean, what you do in those early days determines the future and the culture of the company. And so it's very important to set that tone, whatever that tone is. I worry a little bit when I say the word culture, because right now there's a lot of cult culture going on. So this is not about cult culture. This is not about, setting up a TikTok account and getting 1 million followers. This is a little different than that, right? This is a culture of a company that you want to exist while you're there and beyond you. You're setting up something that's going to go on, right? And when I would talk about culture, I worry a little bit about the fact that, it's easy to become a cult figure, and that's not what you're looking for. So remember, there was this British lord, his name was Lord Acton, and he had a very famous quote, which I think you always want to remember. And that is, he would say, power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so remember that you're an entrepreneurial leader. You do have a lot of power. You probably invested in the company. But what you're really trying to do is set a role model for everybody else around you, and work harder and be the example and set the tone for the company. So what good looks like is that if everybody in the organization thinks they were the reason the company or the business was successful, then you're successful. It shouldn't be just about you. It should be that everybody there thinks, wow, without me, this thing wouldn't have made it, or I really was that's what good looks like. It's the ability that everybody in your organization and your business really believes they were the reason for all the success they had. That's fine. That's great. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, right? Okay, let me talk about leading at IEEE and IEEE entrepreneurship. It's very different at IEEE because you have a mix of people who are truly volunteers and people who are paid staff, right? So they're motivated in different ways. I don't mean they don't believe in the cause together, but volunteers volunteer. So they're sort of motivated to be involved for whatever reason. It could be that they want to, strengthen their career, make their resume look bigger, whatever. But they volunteered, so they're already motivated, right? And that's good. And so what you need to do, but here's the challenge to that is that moderators, I mean, not moderators, people like that who are running, is that when they volunteer, they have a career already. They're busy to some extent. This is not their sole job, right? In fact, it's not even a job. It's a thing they're doing on the side. So you have to balance the career with what they want to do. And if it's an entrepreneur like we do, it's even worse because entrepreneurs are so busy so much of the time that they have not a lot of bandwidth left. And actually, I found that out too. When I first started the initiative, I was still an entrepreneur. I was still a CEO. And at some point I, resigned because it was just too much. That's honestly hard when you're running a company. It's, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 a year. So you don't really get any time off in that sense of the word. But the way to do this, I think, is to match people's skills and interests to roles that fit them, so that if somebody says, hey, I'd like to be involved, you sort of understand how you can put them in and get them. And then assign achievable goals, things that they can actually do to feel like they've contributed. Because, there's nothing worse than being assigned a role and not having any, nothing to do. You're sort of sitting there wondering, well, I got the title, but what am I supposed to do, right? So give them achievable goals, find things that suit. And this is, again, managing to the individual, as I said before, right? And then when you find doers, people who really are active and do a lot, mentor them as much as you can, bring them along, give them more responsibility, and have them move up in the organization. I'm going to explain a little bit about our philosophy at IEEE Entrepreneurship. Our philosophy is we are a big group of people. We're about 20,000 virtual members right now around the world in 65 countries. That's how big we are. About 3/4 of those people are IEEE members. There's a quarter who aren't, and we don't really care. We cast a big tent. We have examples of people who really came into our ecosystem. We call it our ecosystem, saw enough value to become an IEEE member, and then joined IEEE and then moved up. A great example is the past chair, Samantha. Samantha Snapes was, she bumped into us at South by Southwest in 2014. Or 2015 maybe, and then 2016 she came to Toronto to one of our N3XT events, brought her Gigabot there and was there, and then she saw enough value that she joined IEEE, and then I think maybe 4 or 5 people in our company joined IEEE, and then she became chair for 2 years of IEEE Entrepreneurship. So somebody who just happened to be in our ecosystem moved up through and became chair. And our philosophy here is that if we find people who we can have work for judging competitions for us, pitch competitions, which we do, or if they are global ambassadors for us in different parts of the world, and they really do a good job, they're doers, then we move them into liaison positions, on our steering committee. And then at some point, if they can move up into the steering committee, become a voting member. And who knows, maybe at some point they can become chair like Samantha did, Next year I step down as chair, so we need to find a new chair from one of these people who is a real doer, that sort of thing. I think the one thing I want to leave you with, before I stop this talk and take on questions if there's any, is that, especially at IEEE, I think you need to keep it fun. I think it needs to be enjoyable, where people really feel like they're part of a group of people that they can add, they can help, but it's fun. I think humor is a great motivator throughout most every organization you work in. it's kind of reminds me of the soccer thing. If it gets too competitive too early on, people say, I'm not interested. And you don't move them up, and you don't move them up into the top Premier League, right? So you need to keep it engaging, fun, and enjoyable, I think, is one of the keys for the final thoughts I have. And that's kind of my talk about leadership is not about your resume. As you see, that has nothing to really do with my resume, other than I learned lots of little things in all these different areas about leadership. And I'll leave you with Kathy Kleiber's words: leadership comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors.
Great words. Then I have some questions to you right now. You talk about Kathy, so we can go with there's a relationship with mentoring and leadership. Can we learn leadership from our mentors, or are we born as a leader and then we learn something and we upgrade
Great question.
it? Or
We used to ask that rhetorically about stage managers. We would say, are stage managers born or can they be trained? Because I used to teach a course in a university in stage management for master's degrees, and then they would come work in the theater where I was working, and some people just seemed to be naturals, and other people just didn't seem to get it right. I think that was more about the social skills, not about the tactics. The social skills, the social IQ that you have. You can definitely mentor leaders. You can, no doubt about it. Are they born? I don't know. That's a tough question. That's almost like a philosophical question about rationalism versus superioralism. I think leaders have to be very perceptive about social IQ, and I think they have to understand. It goes to the point about managing individuals and not groups, and managing to a person, understanding what motivates them, why it's different. So you have to have a certain amount of social IQ, but then definitely you can mentor. I mean, you can mentor. Always you can mentor, no doubt about it. Answer your question.
okay. Yeah, I got it. My second question is it harder to lead the volunteers or the company workers?
It's just different. I don't know if it's harder or it's different, right? A big company worker is getting paid a salary, and they're hoping that at the end of the year they get a big raise and a bonus, right? So it's more monetary, maybe positions, and all that kind of stuff to get promoted. With volunteers, they're already motivated to the fact that they raise their hand and want to join you. I mean, I'm just talking about IEEE. I volunteer all the time in different organizations all the time for most of my life. And the fact that somebody raises their hand and says, I'd like to be a part of you, shows they're motivated. They're not getting any monetary reward out of it, for sure. They might be getting something that they can put on their resume or something that makes them feel better in a group. I don't know. So they're already motivated and they're not going to get a paycheck. The difference is that they always have other things going on, right? So they have a career, they have something else in their life that requires their attention, right? So you don't get 100%, you get 100% of whatever time they can give you. And that's just the difference. I don't know if it's harder or easier, just different, I think is the word.
Yeah. Also, you can't make happy to everyone. So we should be balanced.
No,
right?
I think what I said early on about authenticity, you need just to be honest. You need to be honest. I actually I'm going to give you an example, somebody at AT&T who was not a good performer. And what happens typically in they just get passed around. So they move from one organization to the next because they're at the bottom of the performance, and they move them and somebody shoves them over into your organization, right? And this person came into my organization, and I worked very hard on putting a performance improvement plan together and had regular meetings and, trying to help them move up. And they still, and I was very honest that, look, if you don't, whatever. So finally I had to let the person go. I was probably the first person to let him go, right? Basically I fired him, right? And it wasn't easy, but I was honest the whole way through the process. I've always been very honest. About a year after, maybe a year and a half after, my phone rings, and it's this person calling, and I could have fallen off a rock. And he said, he said to me, listen, you were the only person in my life who was ever honest to me. I want to ask you a question. It had nothing to do with work. It had something to do he was involved with outside that he wanted an honest opinion. And he was calling me, who had fired him, to ask me what I thought. So it taught me that, even though it's very hard to be honest at times, you have to do it nicely. You can't be mean, right? But if you're honest and authentic, you can give direction to, think about the theater. You're giving direction to actors and actresses who don't really want to hear, they don't necessarily like feedback all that well because, hey, you're stepping on somebody's lines over here. Don't do that. You have to just be authentic and honest. And if you are, people smell it and they'll pick up on it. I'm not saying it's going to work all the time, but don't have any hidden agendas.
So it's a bit different questions. Don't you want to be a player, actor, when you're a stage manager? You ever thought about it?
I mean, did I want to be an actor? Actually, I was
Yeah.
in college. I was in college. I never was a theater major, but I did audition for shows and I'd get roles and I played as an actor. What happened was I was working with a company in Pennsylvania called Actors Company of Pennsylvania, and they needed a stage manager. And they said, "Oh, would you please stage manage this show?" And I said, "Oh, okay. What do you do?" And so I did. And after that, I got pegged as a stage manager, and I got, I was given my professional. I became part of Actors Equity, and I got invitations to go into professional theater, and I started managing bigger shows and bigger shows all across the United States and Canada, and life just took off. And I guess I was good as a stage manager, so I stayed there as a stage manager.
Got it. How do you decide to become an engineer then? Electronics engineer.
That's a great question. That is a great question. So in the theater, I like to know everything that's going on because you own the show, right? And so I was really good. And then suddenly, in this time, this is in the 70s, everything was becoming microprocessor based. The lighting systems were changing. The sound systems were changing. Everything was becoming microprocessor based, kind of computerized, as you would say. And I didn't know anything about this, and this really intrigued me. And so I decided I want to go find out about this. I went to this college in New York. It's called Bond College, to learn about computers and microprocessors, and really enjoyed it. And ended up interfacing to a jet engine, which then got me, into Bell Labs. And then they said, "We're going to pay for you to go on and get your rest of your degrees," and they paid for the rest of my degrees. So it was more just curiosity, probably wanting to know about microprocessors and computers, and then really enjoying it. And that's what moved me out of the theater into engineering.
You found your way to go then. Our audience can ask the questions in the live chat. I can ask that questions too as well. My other question is, don't you fear to become an entrepreneur?
Do you fear to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's scary. It is scary. I mean, especially if you're married and have children, which I was, right? So, now you're not just putting your life at risk, you're putting their life at risk. It's, your financial security. It really does require a commitment. It's a bit like climbing in that sense of the word. If you think about it, you're going to go in all in socially. Your social life is going to pretty much be your company. I mean, there's not a lot of time outside. Financially, you're definitely involved. There's just a lot of, commitment there. So it's almost like what we call in climbing a commitment move, where you don't know, you think there's a hold up there, you hope there's a hold up there, and everything says you've done, what you're doing, right? So you make this move, you step up. It's called a commitment move in climbing. That's kind of what it is like in entrepreneurship. When you decide to go into it and launch a company, it's scary. It's also exhilarating. It's I don't know how to say it. It's good. I really think it's great. I don't want to talk anybody out of it, but I just want you to go in eyes open, knowing that, it's a big risk and you're taking a risk.
Let me look at my questions. You make some mistakes in your whole life, right? Do you think that you learn from your mistakes to become a good leader?
Yes.
Better.
Yes. I think you learn more from a mistake than you do from not making a mistake. I think mistakes teach you. My dad used to say that, experience is the best teacher, but she charges like a specialist, meaning that when you make a mistake, you're going to learn big time not to make that mistake again. And I've made plenty of mistakes throughout my life. And I almost think if you're not making mistakes, you're not pushing hard enough. You know what I mean? I think part of learning is making mistakes. I often say when we're little children, we go learn to walk, we fall down flat in our face, and we get up and we keep on toddling along. And we learn that way because, and then as we get older to be adults, everyone says, don't make mistakes, right? And they enforce this thing to you that, how do you think you learned as a kid? You made mistakes, right? You were curious and you made mistakes. And they drum it out of you as you become an adult. They drum out the curiosity and they drum out, don't ask too many questions, don't make mistakes, right? that's the sad part of it all. You should be asking lots of questions, and you should be making lots of mistakes.
Yeah.
But in companies, you're not motivated to make mistakes. Only some certain companies are you allowed to make mistakes and still do okay. Other ones, it's going to be marked down against your performance review if you do it.
Yeah. I am very inspired with the wisdom and with the youth mixture combination. Do you do that one in your company's entrepreneur, the company you founded as well?
Yeah, you have when you're a small company, you have to be very, very selective about. You don't just hire lots of people, right? You're picking oftentimes skills that you need. You need a hardware engineer, you need a programmer, or you need a marketing person. So it's not so easy to do. That was something I use more in where you can do that in a larger company where you have that kind of resource around you. It's always a good thing. If you can do it, great. And to some extent, if you do this when you're starting up as a entrepreneur, if you have everybody kind of in the room, there's 5 of you or 6 of you in the room, you will have that mix of youth and wisdom, right? I mean, you can have a young programmer who's hot out of college, and then you're going to have somebody who's been around a little bit. So you kind of get it, in that sense of the word. Yeah. It really works well, though. I'm gonna tell you, the seasoned captain says, "Don't go down that road." And the young guy goes, "I'll go down there and I can get out again."
It's a bit like a diversity.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a form of diversity. It's an age diversity, right?
Yeah.
And it could be the seasoned captain could be a woman. It doesn't. I'm not saying, So it is a diversity thing. It gives you a different way of looking at it, and you might have this whole discussion about should we do this, and one person, the wise person, will say no, we shouldn't do this, and the young person might say yes, I can do that. And then you have to figure out.
Young persons are fearless, more fearless, right?
It's good.
These are my questions. I'm very inspired with your speech today. Thank you for to listen to you. We don't have any questions in the YouTube. I'm just a bit curious about, are you doing rock climbing now? Or you?
No, I do a lot of hiking and I do a lot of biking, but not. I mean, when you have to really, when I was, I would maybe do, 200 pull-ups on, just the first knuckles of my fingers. I was, you have to be. I mean, this is serious stuff. You can't. I can go climb, very easy. They're all rated, by the way. I don't know if you know this, but you get a guidebook, and we climbed in the 5th class system, which is a free class system, meaning that you don't put any direct aid into the rocks that you can't get out. So it leaves the rock just like you found it. So the 5th class system had like 5 through 10 when I started climbing. I think it's now 5 through 13 or 15. And you were rated as a certain climber. So you could look at a guidebook and you could see what the rating of the climb was. And then you would sort of know that's within your capability. When I put up a first ascent, I would rate it. And then 2 other parties had to climb after me to agree that rating. And then it got put into the guidebook as, so the climb was called Dicey at Best, and it was put up in 1979, and it was still exists as a really beautiful climb in the Red River Gorge.
Okay, just a curiosity for that. This is the end of my questions. Thank you for coming. Can we take your final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thoughts is this was fun. I enjoyed it. I wasn't sure because typically you do the old IEEE PowerPoint talk. You have the talk and you go through all this stuff. And I just wanted to do something a little different in talking about the experiences that I've had, thinking it might be useful, the vignettes, the things that people can learn from that. And my final thoughts are those words I gave you before. Leadership comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors. That's one of the things. Keep it fun. Just take some of these lessons and learn them. But the biggest one is, be authentic and be honest. Don't try to have a hidden agenda. People will smell it. And then, then you get, a lot of friction and all kinds of stuff. But it's not easy leading, but it can be very rewarding, right? It can be very rewarding. So everyone should practice it and do it. And we're all leaders in our own way.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Your mentor is very far-sighted. So today we are dealing with the women leaders and the other diversity problems here, but your mentor is very far-sighted. Thank you for being here. This is the end of the session. We have one more session at I think 20 minutes later. See you at that. Thank you, Ken, for being there. Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.